tryScrum with 3 studios in place with a strong vision of humanizing organizations. There are a number of studios we have. We are the direct PDN member of Scrum.org. We do deliver all the Scrum.org offerings. We also do IC Agile offerings. We are Scrum.org's endorsed community groups, you know. The 3 studios, Scrum Master Studio, Product Owner Studio, and Agile Leadership Studio. And this webinar is powered by Product Owner Studio. For more information, I request you to visit tryScrum.com. And it wouldn't be good without talking about the crew member, the minds behind this webinar series. Arun is working with tryScrum. Venkatrav is a contributor of tryScrum community. Ramanathan is a contributor of Product Owner Studio. Rakshit is a part of Scrum Master Studio, and Kiran, who recently joined the Product Owner Studio crew. And myself, I'm the founder of tryScrum, and I'm trying to run some of the community meetups with a good intention. Without any further delay, I'm very glad. I'm both nervous, I would say, nervous and excited to introduce Dave. He's not only our guest, he's also, I would say, one among us. I've been working with Dave for almost 2 years now. Have a close interaction with Dave. I know brilliant product ownership from the fields. He is going to share some of his experiences. And he's also a co-author of the Nexus framework for scaling Scrum. And during my college days, I used to remember Headfirst Object-Oriented Analysis and Design. A very brilliant book with a lot of visuals. He's a co-author of that book as well. I'm very, very glad, and tryScrum Studio is pleased to have you today, Dave. Without any further delays, I would like to hand it over to Dave.
Thanks, Venk. Hello, everybody. Let me just share, which would be probably beyond my skills, but I'll try to do it. I like to use the excuse I'm a product owner now, so I don't have to worry about technology. Hopefully you can all see my slides. Hi, everybody. I'm speaking to you from Cape Cod, actually just outside Boston. As you probably all know, it's the 4th of July weekend, so we all go to the beach, though this year is going to be a little different as we wear our masks and try to social distance, so we'll see how that goes. But I'm speaking to you from the basement of my house, or the family house on the Cape, because everybody, the entire family is asleep upstairs. So if a child runs in, I guess this is the life we live under COVID, hey. So originally when I wrote this presentation, or the abstract for the presentation, when tryScrum asked me to do this, I was going to talk just about who is the product owner, what's the role, And I was like, as I talked about it, as I started writing slides, I realized that really what I'm talking about is, what is the product owner today? What is it tomorrow? And where's it going in terms of a role? Because we're in a really interesting point today that product ownership has become a lot more popular. Agile product management, the alignment of products in organizations is becoming the topic du jour. There's a great book by a good friend of mine, Mick Kerson, on, end of projects, now it's all products. It's really interesting where we're at. So I'm going to try to share with you as we go through these slides, hopefully I can, what that's all about. Now, many of you know Scrum.org. We do pre-COVID about 5,000 to 7,000 people were trained every month. About 20,000 people do certifications, try them, not all of them pass every month. We've got about 340 professional Scrum trainers spread throughout the world, and it was founded by Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum. He's my boss, And so as tryScrum, I'm a member of our partner network, which is quite an exclusive club, particularly in India, where there's a lot less partners. So that's who we are. You know who we are. Now, right. So let's get into the actual presentation. If I was speaking to you last year, I'd be talking about the need for agility and the context of product ownership because of things like this. GE's in trouble. They used to be $50 a share. Now they're less than 10. Sears, a big, shop in actually just next door to the office in Burlington, has closed. That one's just closed. Amazon, when they said they were going into the pharmaceutical business or the healthcare business, the share price of all the competitors in that business dropped. And then even Facebook is having a little bit of a hard time, and that hard time's continuing with the US election, actually. But so that's what I've talked about, the need that we don't know what's coming and da-da-da. But I don't need to do that anymore, do I? Because COVID-19 has illustrated very, very graphically why agility is necessary. Many of you are working at home now. You weren't 3 months ago, 2 months ago. Many of you are working with teams that are reconfigured because of this. Many of you are working on product plans now, or working on delivering value that's different because of COVID. As you know, not as many cars are being bought, not as many airlines are being, air seats are being sold, not as many vacations. So all these organizations are trying to pivot rapidly to support a different sets of products. If you're a restaurant, you suddenly have to go completely online with curbside pickup. If you're an entertainment organization like Disney, suddenly all the funds you are spending on the parks can be moved to Disney Plus and the like. So there's a lot more work on that. And if you're big fans of Disney Plus, tomorrow night Hamilton is being shown on it, which is a fantastic musical. It's funny, the last 3 months I spent a lot of time with my kids watching Disney Plus, so I know everything about it. So it's much worse, right? COVID is almost like a poster child for why we need to be more agile. And that was been predicted. You know, Thomas Friedman predicted it in his book, Thank You for Being Late. He talked about these things of globalization, of which India is obviously a massive part of digital globalization. Many of you work with international organizations. Many of you work with clients that are in different parts of the world. Maybe this is more normal for you than it is for me, which is, so you're at an advantage, so use it. Mother Nature's changing, population growth. You know, a large percentage of your population is not going to have access to running water potentially in the next 50 years because of the Himalayan melt, right? You know, there's populations movement. The fact that when I was born, there was 3.6 billion people, 3.7 billion people, and now there's 7 something, right? It's crazy, the world. And the climate that's supporting it is changing. The fact that it's sunny in England, I mean, my gosh, they had a heat wave the other day. That never happens. And then, of course, technology, innovation, the Moore's law, the continuous exponential growth of computing continues. So now, talking about this in a different way, we have this economist, which I'd point you out. It's really interesting work that she does, Cleda Perez. She's Venezuelan, but she lives in London at the London School of Economics. And what she talks about is the fact that we're moving ages. And she describes the 5 ages since the Industrial Revolution. Now, you could say there's 4, you could say there's 7, but she happens to have picked 5, and we're in this digital age now. Now, what you can see is every single transition from the early part of that age, which she describes as the installation period, to what she describes as the very enjoyable deployment period, there's this thing called a turning point. We are currently, she argues, in that turning point. And COVID-19, so this turning point happens to be a significant, you know, in the previous one, it was about 15 years, 16 years in length. This one's going to be probably over 20 years, because what we're doing is fundamentally changing a lot of how the world operates. And maybe COVID-19 is that last push to move us to be predominantly digital in nature. And what that means is, as we move from a previous age that governments, companies, institutions, you know, everything is based on, when we move into this new age, it's very different. You know, if you look at investments, you know, planning cycles have to be much shorter in term because the large amount of unknown and opportunity. The fact is, and this is as a product owner, you spend your entire life trying to produce visions and long-term plans and future directions and strategy, and then COVID comes along. And I can speak very personally as a product owner recently. I had a very clear roadmap for this year of the things that we were going to invest time and effort in. On March 13th, I picked it up and threw it out because the most important thing that we could do was support our trainers delivering live virtual classes. And we pivoted the entire business of our training business, or 7,000 training seats a month, to do live virtual classes. And some people on this call were part of the development teams. We use a GitHub open source kind of model. We have stewards for the classes, and we ran multiple experiments with things like Mural, liberating structures, breakout rooms, and we fundamentally pivoted. Now, guess what? My roadmap is in tatters. In fact, this week, for the first time since COVID, I came back to it and said, okay, so what does this mean for what we're going to do for the rest of the year? What should we do? So I sat down with my team and sort of started talking about that. Short-term planning horizons. Now, we only did annual planning horizons at scrum.org, which I thought was short-term. Turns out that it wasn't short-term enough. Short-term profit is the mantra of the mass production digital age of oil, the age of oil. Mission and impact seems to be increasingly important. We see that obviously with the social conscious that seems to be growing throughout the world, but and how millennials approach work, but also organizations. You know, if you're a triple B, you know, a B Corp, as it were, where bottom line is just one part of your responsibility to the environment, to the community. Conscious capitalism is emerging as a predominant force, and it's interesting. It's a bit like that sort of Buddhist mantra, you know, being nice to other people. Actually, you're doing it to get karma back, which ultimately helps move you on in your. And that's true of the mission and impact. It's just profit is not the only measure of success, or earnings per share is not the only measure of success. The mass production age was all about scarcity and efficiency, and I think that, you know, the Industrial Revolution really embodied that, didn't it? With, you know, you get a task, you become really good at it. Things like Six Sigma and the like push improvements and efficiency to the nth degree. But ultimately, we live in a world of abundance. The fact that my website is over 1 million people go every month to my website. Many of them are from India. And what we're seeing is that I run that on AWS using, you know, it cost me about $2,000 a month. Great. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, would have been able to do that. You know, we live in this world of opportunity. Cross-functional teams versus these specialists, self-organization versus process control. And I think the last one's the most interesting one, ladies and gentlemen. The rise of the creator. The rise of the creator. Management used to be king. And I don't know what it's like in India, but my experience of going there, when I manage it was all about trying to become a manager, and then a manager's manager, and progress. Nowadays, I hope that slowly that Silicon Valley kind of mantra, where your software engineers and your SMEs and your process experts and all these are actually paid more than managers, because ultimately they add more value. So we're seeing that fundamental shift. So where does the product owner fit into this? This is sort of a Dilbert. We can't do a presentation about product ownership without it. I added all the features that each of you demanded. Now our product is a worthless homogeneous of complexity. I appreciate your teamwork. I think this sort of sums up. Whenever I open Excel or I try to add a new cell phone to the Bluetooth connection on my Volvo car, I realize how complicated people have created things. They build these ultimately infinitely complex solutions that are so far away from the outcomes and the value that we're trying to achieve that you're like, oh, that's interesting. The product owner's ultimate job is to fix this problem, to deliver value, to maximize value and opportunity, to basically provide the team and the organization the most valuable possible thing. Now, what we've found over and over again is that agility is undermined by this idea of committee. So for complex problems, what you find with a complex problem is you don't know what you know until you know that you don't know it, meaning that it's this homogeneous, you know, sort of, you've got this set of requirements, you know, what could you be trying to do, the outcomes you seek, the solution that you're creating. And as you change one, it changes the other as you change one. Now that means two things. It means that it's almost impossible to present all the information in an effective way to a large group of people and then rapidly make decisions on it. And secondly, those decisions happen at such a great cadence that getting the committee together is not going to happen. The other thing is, though, the context is almost impossible to share. So committees don't work for complex problems. You have to make decisions rapidly, which is the reason why Scrum has a single human being as the product owner. The other thing that's interesting is compromise, which is the reality of committee and democracy. Democracy is the most inefficient system in the world. I think there was an Indian politician that described the Indian democratic system as incredibly inefficient, but that often meant that because nothing ever got done, it often meant that was good because you wouldn't want the government doing lots of things; it would just be a nightmare. I thought that was sort of apropos, very on point, because what we've seen is that democracy ultimately requires compromise. Compromise increases complexity. Complexity then ends up increases the number of dependencies, gets in the way of us delivering value rapidly. So the reason why Ken, and this was predominantly Ken, made the product owner a single human being was really to focus on making decisions rapidly, even if they're the wrong decisions. Because making a wrong decision is better than making no decision at all, as long as you get the ability to change course after that decision's made. So interestingly, the original, so it's 25 years in October, that first document for UPSLA that describes Scrum was published. In that original document, and I read it recently, Agile product manager was the definition of this role, not product owner. The reason why Ken and Jeff pivoted to product owner in the definition in the Scrum guide was because they wanted to emphasize a very important point. Product managers, by their very nature, manage stakeholders, they manage the development team, they manage the work, they manage if they're lucky. Whereas the word or the phrase product ownership really embodies what a product owner does, which is make decisions. They own it. They are the only people that can decide what the outcomes that the team seeks. And this is a definition in the Scrum guide. It talks about the product backlog. It introduces the idea of optimizing value. It emphasizes the fact that you've got this transparent artifact called a product backlog, which allows us to visualize the work. And it says that there's one person that's accountable, one person for making these decisions. And that's super powerful. To sort of take that to its essence, maximizing the value of the product and development team. That's an interesting point as well, because ultimately the outcomes that the development team achieve by delivering incremental progress against an ultimate product goal, that is being optimized by the product owner making decisions. Now, the beauty of Scrum is you get the ability at every sprint review to get a bunch of people, let's call them stakeholders, interested parties, people that can provide feedback, into a room, virtual or in person, to review the outcome of that sprint and then provide input to allow us to maximize the next sprint. This product owner is responsible for inviting the right people to challenge their understanding and provide great feedback. Must be empowered to make decisions, and this is where it all goes horribly wrong in most organizations. Most organizations hate making decisions. They're sort of against it because decisions could be wrong, right? The last thing you want to do is make a decision. So what they do is they create more process to decide what requirements, they sign them off, they have committees, and then if they're wrong, well, it's everybody, so it's nobody's fault. This role is all about empowered to make decisions. And they're the only people that can, now this is an interesting phrase because the product owner doesn't tell the development team and how to work. It doesn't tell them what to do really. It tells them what outcomes they should try to achieve. And depending on the situation, it varies greatly. It's not easy. I'm a product owner. One of my biggest stakeholders is Ken Schwaber, the creator of Scrum. Now, you may think that he is a little bit opinionated about Scrum. sometimes he definitely likes to tell me what I'm doing wrong, which is great because he's an amazing, inspiring genius. But it's challenging. So let's talk a little bit about what the reality of product ownership is today. Now, this is the problem. Many roles exist to support waterfall, including business analyst, project manager, SME, all of these very complex. The organizations tend to be aligned around systems. So you have a team responsible for RP150, etc. Products exist in the business, but not in the IT world. And there's this mapping, which is incredibly complex. You look at the value stream, it's just a real mess. Mostly mostly the agile initiatives are being driven by the IT organization. Now that is changing. We have a very strong relationship with McKinsey, and what's interesting is they're driving this holistic change across organizations. So for the first time, I'm actually seeing cross-functional teams doing agile. It's really, really exciting. But historically, most people that are doing Scrum came from the IT organization. And most organizations don't really, accountability and responsibility are hidden by something called process. And then we have this PMO, because nobody kind of knows what's happening, making sure the process is adhered to make sure that it runs through. It's almost as though they're building cars, not complex systems. It's almost as though they're building houses or bridges, not complex systems. That's how the reality is today. And a lot of people say, well, let's not change the reality. I coined this term water Scrum fall to describe the fact that Scrum's being implemented in the existing reality. So that basically means product owner becomes business analyst becomes product owner. And then there's this whole thing around requirements, that in Scrum, we don't explicitly say, hey, the product owner or this person does all the requirements work, because we don't believe that. What we believe is that product owners should ultimately own the business outcomes of the work that you're doing. The requirements are built by the product owner driving the direction, the outcomes, the team working with him or her to create the right requirements to satisfy those things. There's a lot of options around that. Sometimes product owners do requirements. They write the user stories, the success criteria, etc. Sometimes they don't. It doesn't matter. The product owner role, and remember role, it's a role, not a job description. Role is responsible for the outcomes. How it's done depends on the situation you're in. So the product owner ultimately has to work with the team. Otherwise, they become a bottleneck often. Which is sort of interesting. And we see that in many organizations. We see this sort of like, well, the product owner writes all the requirements, the dev team takes those requirements, does some refinement with the product owner. That then creates, updates the backlog to allow us to have ready to plan. So that goes to the top of the backlog. That then moves into the sprint. The sprint, they talk about it. They don't really talk about a sprint goal. They focus on the PBIs, the backlog items. They then translate those into tasks, which then go into, get decomposed in Jira, then work on it, and that's how it works. And that might work for you. But if you really want to empower a team, the best way is to, instead of focusing on the PBIs and the requirements, to focus on the outcomes, and then allow the requirements to emerge in support of that in the context of the product that the increment you're working on. Remember, the Scrum team does the work. So don't get stuck, which most organizations do, on the product owner becoming the business analyst, or the business analyst becoming the product owner, doing all the requirements and becoming that bottleneck. The Scrum team is ultimately responsible. The other thing that's interesting about the reality, so if you've got this sort of like model where nobody really wants to make responsibility, you've got this massive process, the product owner, you're doing Scrum now, so the business analysts who made the product owner, they're still doing the things that they did when they were the business analysts. They've become a bottleneck for the team. Sprint 1 becomes a nightmare because the product owners, so you get this sort of like staggered sprint model, which is a disaster. Then the other interesting thing is then you suddenly become the least popular person in the world. Look at that. Now, this is talking about product management, but it's illustrative of the fact that devs really don't like product managements and product owners. The business doesn't like them because they don't give them the stuff that they want. And of course, the organization doesn't like them because they spend large amounts of money on stuff and it's always late. The enemy is in front of us, the enemy is behind us, the enemy is to the right, to the left. They can't get away this time. So that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to really take advantage of everybody hating us, to really sort of like try to understand what they really need, try to demonstrate the value of product ownership, and really start delivering. I mean, it can't get much worse, right? So why not just move on? And that's, you're stuck in the middle of this really interesting situation. And I think that is the most powerful place to begin. You have access to stakeholders to find out exactly what people want, what defines success. You can leverage the organization to deliver the ROI necessary. And you can work very closely with your dev team or teams to make success. Now, interesting point about teams or teams. Each product has a product owner, not each dev team. You can have multiple dev teams working from the same product backlog. That product backlog ultimately is owned by one product owner. You don't have a product owner per team. Now, sometimes you do, but you don't have to. You have one product owner per product. Now, you might ask, what is a product then? And we didn't go into detail on this slide deck, but a product, I like to think of it not as necessary. It's really a sort of an abstract concept. It has a clear boundary, meaning you know what's in it and what's out of it. It has a clear customer, you know who it's for. That might be multiple customers, etc., but it has a clear understanding of that. It also has a clear success. It can be measured. If you can have those things, you can define anything really as a product, as long as it has real clarity of boundary. You know what it is and what it isn't. It has a clear customer, and it can be measured. Success can be measured in some way. And you need to organize around that. Now, ideally, it's atomic, or it has clear, the boundary is so absolute that you know exactly where it is and what it isn't. It's Excel, it's Word, it's whatever. It's likely to not be that. It's likely just to be a subset of services that's coupled together in a value stream. And that's when it starts getting really complicated, and that's when your stakeholder numbers increase. Now, remember that it's all about the customer and the opportunity. Though you spend all your life serving these people, really the one person that's not on it, or the one persona that's not on it, is this. And you have a great opportunity, because you have not only a better understanding, you can reframe customers often, you can understand them better, you can understand where the opportunity is better. You also have the ability to take to these customers these amazing technologies and ideas, and that combination is incredible. You have this amazing magic product box, and as a product owner, and this you often don't realize this, or you're not empowered to take advantage of this, you could change the business model, meaning, hey, what does it mean to do this? Should we deliver directly? Should we work with partners? Should we use a channel? Oh, channel's another thing. Is the actual way we get to the customer correct? Should we leverage another way? Oh, is the underlying sort of essence of the thing, the architecture, correct? Is it how we engage with them, the outcomes that we manifest, and the dialogue we have, how we empathize with them through the experience, correct? Is it the right customer? Are we wrong around that? And ultimately, is it the functionality? And then you do that in the context of what's desirable, what's feasible, what's viable, and what's culturally okay. If you're a manufacturer of I don't know, I'm trying to think. If you're a hotel manufacturer, there's only so many things you can do. If you do hotels, you do hotels. So that gives you an amazing set of choices, which of course increases complexity. We live in a world of opportunity, but not everything is an opportunity, and you end up wiggling these knobs on this magic product box to make these decisions. So today, the reality of today for product ownership is you're stuck in traditional organizations that haven't really pivoted properly to Agile and Scrum. Maybe that's changing, fingers crossed. You're sort of responsible for all the requirements, but you're not. And really you need to take advantage of the team to do that. And you need to empower the team to take ownership of the outcomes through expressed in requirements and work and the like, and experiments and the like. And you have this sort of like, hopefully you start realizing that there's a massive opportunity, and then either directly or indirectly, either by stealth in Machiavellian ways, you start wiggling this product box to start amazing all these stakeholders and delivering value to your customers. So that's the reality of today. What's tomorrow all about? So as I said, what we're starting to see in the world is a shift. You know, there's McKinsey are talking about it with their 5 traits of an agile organization and transforming to become more agile. We're seeing that where the most successful companies in the world in terms of valuation, organizations like Facebook, organizations like Amazon, organizations like Tesla, the customer is really king. This customer saying Amazon, the reason why they're so successful in the US in particular is because they're maniacally focused on delivering value to customers. So that means that we're seeing this shift. If we're shifting in this way, that means the product owner suddenly goes from basically a management role trying to keep everybody happy to one where they're leading the charge. You know, we've gone from an infantry battalion to the Marines or the Special Forces, where suddenly the NCO, the non-commissioned officers, which is the product owner, are suddenly the most important people in the world, and they're driving to success. That was a very poor army analogy, and I'm not sure if it totally worked, but I did my best. That means that we need to be focusing on value, not on politics. Now, this is the reality. This was as you can see, a link down there. There was a survey done. This was quite in 2015 about features that are being added. You know, that, as you can see, it's pretty much an even, improves the outcomes. A third of them did. Most of them make things worse or did nothing. Now, value is not necessarily at the highest, level in your organization. Doing stuff seems to be more important than doing the right stuff. And I don't know if you see that in your companies today. It's better not to challenge. Some of the stuff you're delivering is not going to be that valuable. Anybody's done a Salesforce or a Siebel rollout or any ERP rollout, 90% of the stuff you're doing is just a pain and nobody's going to use it. And some of it, 10%, might be quite valuable. But unfortunately, you spend all your time trying to deal with the complexity of the 90. So the 10% doesn't get the effort that it deserves. So we need to shift to an outcome-based approach. An outcome is a state of experience by the user of a product. An outcome is hopefully something valuable. Now, you might have seen our professional Scrum with UX class, or maybe you've attended it. Hopefully you have taken advantage of the virtual world that we live in now to go. And this was a class created by Jeff and Josh, and I sat through this class with fortunately both of these amazing agile lean UX experts. And afterwards I was like, oh bugger. I was a little bit annoyed because I looked at my backlog, I looked at the work that I was doing, and I realized that I was describing work. I wasn't describing outcomes. So now I set on the path of reframing everything in terms of the outcomes that I achieve, which has a clear customer. Ultimately, every outcome is in the context of a customer, a person, a human being. That satisfaction gap is the thing that we're trying to deliver. So that means that we must clearly describe the customer and understand the customer. And that is not the responsibility of the product owner. The responsibility of the product owner is to make sure that that customer is transparent to the team, but everybody needs to understand the customer and understand the gap that we're trying to achieve and the outcomes that we try to achieve. So I often go to, I used to go to organizations. Now I spend my life sitting in front of a screen like this. But when I went to those organizations, I used to see frequently fabulous Scrum boards or Kanban boards on the wall. With all sorts of really cool ways of looking at progress, looking at impediments, making sure that brilliant. Now, not one of them, actually that's not totally true now, but many of them didn't put the customer on the wall. I really, really love it when I go into a team room and I see Kanban boards, yeah, great, but I also see the persona. You know, whether it's, you know, Aunt Mabel who's trying to get, you know, maybe it's an airline company, and we're trying to serve Aunt Mabel by delivering her to her grandkids, you know, for the holidays. How can we better serve that? You know, what's the characteristics of Aunt Mabel? Maybe she books a year in advance. Maybe she has to get picked up from the curbside because she's in a wheelchair. Maybe whatever those characteristics are, and then we look at the satisfaction gap that we have. Super important to be able to articulate that so that everybody on the team understands it, so that we can effectively deliver value to Aunt Mabel, as it were. The other thing that's interesting is, so if we think about the customer and the empathizing to the customer and building a good understanding of the customer, this is a Gartner diagram, which should say that, and I apologize that it doesn't. Sorry, Gartner. This is a Gartner diagram, and it's awesome, and it should have that reference on it. I don't know why it fell off. Anyway, this is some work that they've been doing. And what we see with this is they talk about basically 3 types of innovation or next generation thinking. They talk about design thinking or ideation, you know, D-School. They then talk about the work of Eric Ries and Steve Blank, Lean Startup, the concept of experimentation. They then talk about the idea of agility, Scrum in particular, as you see from those words, right? The fact that you rapidly deliver on that. And it's a really interesting combination of those things. Now, I think it's great that they started thinking about this, but I actually don't think it's like that. I think ultimately it happens continuously, and you do a little bit of design thinking, a little bit of lean startup, and a little bit of Scrum over and over again. And ultimately, the empirical approach to delivering value is the combination of those things to greater or lesser extent every sprint or every cycle, every plan, sense, respond cycle. And so what you end up doing is incrementally moving through an understanding of the problem, where you spend maybe more time up front on design thinking, then more time on lean startup, then more time on Scrum, but we do a little bit of that every time. So I think if you're a product owner today and you're getting ready for tomorrow, I would urge you to start thinking about design thinking, lean startup, but look at reading those books, maybe attending the PSU class or something like that. You know, I'm not saying you must attend our classes. Reading some stuff on our website about some of this stuff. Jeff and Josh have written some cool stuff, as has Eric Weber and Gary Pedretti. Some really interesting ideas around this. Sign up for Stephen Blank's blog. Read. I know Eric is currently process of writing a new book, but read the Lean Startup and the work that GE did around that, and start familiarizing yourselves with these ideas. But remember, ultimately, all of that needs to be in a continuous iterative approach. Dare I call it an empirical approach. So now let's talk about the future. Okay, so we've talked about the reality of today. We're sort of business analysts that become product owners, or project managers that become product owners, and we're in this sort of like complicated mess where nobody really knows what we do or how we work. Maybe we're using Scaled Agile, so there's a product manager as well that's telling us what to do, so I don't really get ownership, and that's okay. We can work out how to survive in this world. I guess in those situations, focus on delivering as much value as you can to your customer, and everything else will be all right, you know. Then we moved into tomorrow, thought a little bit about the role of the client, the customer, and how we needed to sort of make that front and center. So if you do have a product manager that you report to because you're using Scaled Agile, we walk up to that product manager and say, tell me about the customer. Let's do some persona work together. Let's learn about the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And then let's reframe the backlog, the product backlog, in terms of those outcomes. Let's look at lean startup and design thinking and start seeing how we can take advantage of some of these techniques, some of this stuff in that. So where's it all going? What's next? The future. I think realistically that we're going to, over the next, I actually do believe that COVID-19 has been a wake-up call for organizations. And I really do believe that that Agile organizations have responded to this pandemic in a much more effective manner than traditional organizations. So the reality of that is that I truly hope that the new norm is going to be agility, an organic, team-centered, human. I love the fact that tryScrum talk about humanizing the workplace and the like, and obviously Gunther does that as well, and that's a great message, but ultimately I believe that you're going to have teams of teams focused on customer outcomes, aligned in organizations that support it. I honestly believe that. And that means when you start moving away from an organization that's built around the constructs of the inside of the organization, you start restructuring the organization so it's built around the customers and the outcomes that they seek, then you end up with a really cool thing. Not only do you have Scrum teams clearly aligned, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That purpose becomes super valuable. But you then have the ability to then, if I'm focused maniacally on my customer and I don't work in a testing group, I don't work in a dev group, or I don't work in a product management group, or I don't work then I need a community that supports me. So I then become part of this product community where suddenly I'm working, as a product owner or as a product manager. I spend time learning from other product managers about all the cool ways of doing my job a little bit better. The next thing that we'll see is, as organizations align to customers, as we start as active professional product people becoming part of a broader product community and exchanging ideas and mastering our skills and journeyman sort of stuff and master type stuff, apprentice type stuff, as we become better at that, what we see is that organizations will then start thinking more effectively around value streams, and funding will change. So that means that as a product manager today, or as a product owner today, what you're often funded is on this very complex planning cycle, and you fund the work. You won't. That will change. Instead, what we'll do is we'll fund value streams that will size the amount of support we can provide for that value stream. For instance, imagine a PSM1 or PSM, Professional Scrum Master value stream, PSM 1, 2, 3, all the classes, all the assessments. I know how much that costs every month to maintain all of that stuff. But I know how much money's coming in. I know what the outcomes that I achieve. Now, you might argue that I'm not as good on the outcomes as I should be, and I do aspire to get better on what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve as we take people through this journey to Scrum Mastery, to become a really good Scrum Master. But the thing is, I could then fund that in that way. So that means I could size a team to support it. And yes, there'd be some shared services across the whole organization, but I could rethink everything around funding. The other thing that's really, really interesting is that then that naturally lends us to thinking about measurement in a different way. It means that we step back from measuring product owners by on time, on budget, measure them by how much pain they create, and instead focuses on delivering business value. This is something called EBM, evidence-based measurement. And actually over the next few months, there's going to be a new class in our leadership curriculum coming out to support this, because it's so super interesting. And I think, that it's been the journey of building this class, to speak candidly, has been very interesting. It's been driven by Patricia Kong from my team and Kurt Bittner from my team. And what's been super interesting is it's really been quite hard. And the reason why is because this is a little ahead of the market. And so there's a lot of choices that have to be made. So the first version of this class comes out, I think, early in the autumn, in the fall. And it'll be interesting to see the impact, because what it's trying to do is it's trying to help leaders reframe the work in terms of the outcomes and measure those outcomes to ultimately drive the improvement to the way they're working. Improvement in terms of how you do it, and improvement in terms of what you're doing, the outcome that you're seeking. And so, as you see, there's 4 dimensions that product owners will be measured on. One, which is current value, which is the you can think of that as maybe it's the net promoter score, maybe it's the revenue, maybe it's the customer success, the employee success. How successful is this today, and seeing how that trends over time, how that changes. And that obviously has a corollary, or another side to that coin, which is the unrealized value. So how much opportunity is there? What is the what are if I'm an airline and this is a booking system, what do people on my competitors, what's the maybe the net promoter score for them is like a 36, and I'm a 30, so there's an opportunity to get there 6 points, and there's an opportunity to get 6 points more, and become 42, which is the leaders in this quadrant, that sort of thing. So that you can think of that as the market, as it were. And then serving that or supporting that are two interesting sets of key performance indicators. One is time to market. How rapidly does it take me to deliver something to the customer? How rapidly from idea to implementation? Now, this is where you cut the suit to suit the cloth. Depending, maybe it's cycle time, maybe it's mean time to resolution, maybe it's, I don't know. It depends on your situation. What is your level of control? And then how much of that stuff, A2I, how much of that stuff is actually new, valuable innovation, as opposed to bug fixes or updates to Drupal or whatever the sort of like the boring stuff that has to come out continuously, GDPR updates, etc. Those four measures, those four categories of measure, obviously in your situation, you'll pick the measures that work, will long term be the way in which products, and therefore product owners, are measured. And an interesting, very telling characteristic is when it's almost impossible for, when working with the business, to find measures for your product that fit in these categories. That is an interesting nature. And yes, the top one's all about market, and the bottom one's all about organizational capability. Oh, I'm going to sneeze. No, I'm not. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Great time to have a pause, eh? Okay. Hay fever, I think. Of course, whenever you sneeze now, it's like, has he got some illness? Is he got COVID? So you have to be very careful sneezing in America, because people carry guns. Anyway, so let's summarize. I've got a couple of minutes now just to do a summary, and then we'll have, hopefully almost 10 minutes for questions. I've tried to make sure we have some time for questions, which is, perhaps the opportunity to interact. And I'm hoping the guys have been capturing some very easy questions to answer. Otherwise, they'll be in trouble. All right, so let's just summarize. All right, so remember, the product owner is responsible, really is in response to this need for empirical process, this need for empiricism. So a product owner ultimately drives value into the organization in a complex world that requires them to do little bits of value and measure the success of that. You can think of incremental value management, as it were. Well, that sounds like a book. They're not focused just on requirements. Now, they have obviously a big relationship about requirements, but ultimately the requirements, how you satisfy those outcomes and the value that you perceive, is going to be the responsibility of the Scrum team. It's a really hard job, not just because you're managing stakeholders. Managing is not the right word. You're working with stakeholders. Sometimes it is managing stakeholders, by the way. You're working with the team, serving the stakeholders, serving the organization, and more importantly, serving the customer. As you try to navigate, balance all those constituents, you're trying to deliver value, and you own a vision. And sometimes that vision isn't necessarily shared by all of these people. Perhaps my hardest job as the product owner, the ultimate product owner here at scrum.org, is to get that vision and get it owned by everybody that's contributing towards it. I know that when I'm working with the professional Scrum trainer community, because many of those people have day jobs or doing other things, when I come and talk to them, often the context that I describe the work we're doing is missing. And so I spend an inordinate amount of time worrying as a product owner about describing the vision in a way that is compelling, that helps us all get to the right place. Because one thing that I've learned very quickly is if you invite stakeholders to a sprint review and they don't share that context, that vision, the feedback you get, I wouldn't say it's wrong, but it's out of rhythm with the work that you're doing. So it's super interesting, that is. I believe that product ownership is a really painful job today because of all of that. And because you often work in an organization that isn't really agile, that's sort of water scrum full. But it will get easier. It will get easier because everybody now is starting to understand the power of agility in response to this set of unknowns, this complex world that we live in. It'll get easier because the tools that we can deploy, such as user-centric design, the ideas of UX, the ideas of D-School, the personas, the measurement models, the funding, aligning around value streams, these things are changing. Organizations are realigning to customers. They see the success that can create because COVID has highlighted the very fundamental premise of being customer-centric. The customers haven't gone. COVID has not, I mean, obviously some have, but we don't talk about that. The customers haven't gone. What's gone is the way that they can consume your product. What's gone is their ability to consume your product, maybe because of money. What's gone is their maybe some of their desires around the product. Now, if you look into the problems, the outcomes that they're trying to achieve still, hopefully you can pivot your products and services to be better aligned to that. So if you become customer-centric, you can weather the storm created by situations like COVID-19. Design thinking, lean startup give you some fabulous tools to do that. I recommend in every organization you need to start building a product community to start sharing that stuff and getting better together. And then think about measures. Think about measures. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. We've got about 7-8 minutes for questions. We respect the time box, obviously. Gentlemen, have Venk or Aaron or Venkat, have we got any questions? Hopefully that was enjoyable. Hopefully you didn't go to sleep during it. I know it's late in the day for you. It's early in the morning for me. So I've had a cup of coffee, so I'm ready for it.
It was fantastic. Actually, you turned the esoteric to exoteric, I would say. Talking about the 3 stages of product ownership. Probably the future is really interesting. And I have one private question that I want to first raise. You talked about the 3 levels of Scrum Mastery. Do we have a class for PSM3?
No. And the reason why we don't have a class of PSM, so we've thought a lot about that, obviously. The reason why we don't have a class of PSM3 is ultimately it's about the practice and experience and developing. So if you do the assessment, you'll realize that it's pulling on all your real life experiences and the frame being Scrum, etc., and trying to apply that. So we don't have a class, and we never will. The only thing that I've been thinking about doing a better job of helping PSM3 students, people that want to take the assessment, is, well, one, we need to be more active in terms of creating mentorship programs and helping build mentorship programs. It's on my backlog. It's something that we're thinking about. Obviously, our work on professional development and Leslie's work, this got a bit personal there for a second, and some of my team's work on professional development is focused on that as well. So but the one other thing that I think we need to do a better job of is having personal case studies that talk about the problems that they solve. So, a bit like if you do an MBA, you read millions of case studies. You read about the pricing for Viagra. You read about, I'd like to see us do a better job of building case studies, not at the sort of generic company level, but more at the, hey, what does it mean for a Scrum Master or a product owner? And then they can help you learn the skills to take those tests. But I don't imagine there'll be a training class.
Thanks, Dave. So another question from Sai Kumar. How can a product owner measure the return on investment prior to the feature implementation? Is it possible?
How can they measure the return on investment? Well, obviously, that's an interesting question. Ultimately, any feature that you deliver has hopefully some value that's measurable. or it changes something. So what most organizations that are very maniacal about putting measures in place do is they baseline what that product has, what the capabilities are. So maybe that's in terms of customer satisfaction, maybe that's in terms of revenue, maybe that's in terms of employee satisfaction, maybe that's in terms in, it's a call center, how quickly calls are being answered, etc., or whatever. So they get those baseline. You then deliver your features and you look at what changes. Now, what's interesting is the ROI ultimately is how much did it cost us to build that feature, and how much impact did it have? What is the ultimate ROI of that? Now, I don't really like doing ROI on a feature by feature basis, because I believe that there's no single feature that has a single value and also realistically a single cost. What I prefer to do instead is look at the ROI of the team delivering value on that product. Now, we know how much the team costs, and if we can put in place the right measures, maybe EBM are a good set of measures to put in place, we can effectively measure on a frequent basis the impact. Now, what I'd like to make sure we don't do, though, is use that as a stick to hit the team. Instead, let's use it as an opportunity to learn so that we can reframe putting in, getting better. The problem is software development teams in particular, but product teams in general, are very good as if you tell me a measure, I will make sure that we hit it. Instead, let's use our measures to learn, and then that will hopefully drive better return on investment of the value that we're delivering. With respect to agile transformations, there's been some interesting work recently done by Scrum.org and McKinsey that you can read on our website about the value of agile across whole organizations, and it really interesting data for many companies on the impact to customers, the impact to employees, the impact to revenue, the impact to operations, and it's kind of cool. But I don't really like feature-driven ROI. I think it's a little bit. I think it just doesn't really work. I think we're just cheating if we do that. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. Then another interesting question: how can a product owner be measured for performance? Who is to assess that?
Oh my God, height. Only height. The taller the product owner, the better. No, or lack of hair. That's another good one. That's an interesting question. So how do you measure the success? I mean, really, the simplest one is the value they deliver to the organization. And again, it comes back to how is value measured, and then it comes back to this. So maybe the most important job a product owner can do is try to work out what value means to the people that are paying him or her. Then to put some place of measures and then to deliver against that. So how am I measured? I'm measured by the impact on our mission, which is improving the profession, which is actually slowly changing to helping teams and people solve complex problems. So I said to Ken, so how do we measure the success of that? He goes, I've got no idea. So so what we do is we actually measure, how many people are coming to the website, how many people are doing training, how many people are taking tests, how many people. So we survey people that do the training 6 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years. We only got to that point. We're looking at what the impact of our training and our learning is. We're going to maybe roll that out to assessments as well. Because what we really want to understand is, if you go on one of these guys' classes, you're going to be wowed. I mean, there's no surprise there. They're professionals. They're good at that. That's what they do for a living. The question I ask, though, is, yeah, they might love the class, but did they learn anything in 6 months, in 18 months? If they learned those things, and are they applying them, then that's a success. Now, they're lagging indicators, unfortunately, but that's what Ken and I are experimenting with now to measure my success and to measure the success of Scrum.org.
Yep. So in the spirit of time, I will take the final question. It's an interesting one, maybe a little bit on the traits. What do you think a PO should imbibe to learn the art of product management?
What should people, what?
The PO should imbibe to learn the art of product management.
To buy or read or attend? What do you mean imbibe?
So I will let Ramanathan speak so that he can ask you that question. Ram, would you like to ask that question directly?
Yeah. Hi, Dave.
Hello, Ram.
Yeah.
Hey.
I just want to know, what could be the qualities that you think a PO should imbibe to learn the art of product management?
Oh,
When it,
embody. Okay, I get it. Sorry. Electronics, distance. Great God. What should the traits be? Interesting. You should say that. We did a survey we did actually a deep psychological test thing with McKinsey. I hate to talk about McKinsey a lot today. It's just weird that it just happens to be top of mind, maybe. So what are the traits? The most important traits, I think, is people that care about customers, that people care about sort of like the product, the outcomes. They're entrepreneurial by nature. They're really trying to think how they can deliver more value to the customers. They care very deeply. Usually, the most successful product owners tend to be extroverts, not because you can't be a good product owner as an introvert, but the amount of time you spend with people means you're exhausted if you are an introvert. So what we tend to see is people that are people-centric. That doesn't mean they're all of them, but that tends to be. The other thing that's super interesting about a product owner is they have to be inspiring, I think. They have to be able to, what I try to do, and I described it as one of my biggest challenges, is to make sure that all these different groups that I work with, the community, there's Ken, my team, the customers themselves, they all get the vision. And when I get feedback, it's in that context. So they ultimately have to believe a little bit as well, which requires some level of inspiration. There's some of the characteristics that I think are super important to be a product owner, and also a little. I think in general, as an agile practitioner, you have to be. You don't take yourself too seriously, because we spend a lot of time being agile, Scrum. Let's just laugh at ourselves a little bit. We're trying to change the world. Yes, we're trying to improve the products we deliver. Yes, we're trying to do it in a way that allows our teams to feel like they're human beings again. Yes. But let's not take ourselves too seriously as we do it. Let's have a laugh, because smiling, I think you deliver a lot more value when you smile.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. In the spirit of time, we are already overrun 3 minutes. So thank you very much
Sorry.
for joining this webinar. Thank you, Dave. We extend our gratitude from tryScrum team for spending 1 hour talking about some insightful conversations about product ownership, especially during your vacation time. We look forward to seeing you in some time. For more information about the future webcast series, I encourage all of you to visit tryscrum.com/webcast. Exciting speakers are coming up. Thank you, Dave.